In the book of John 4:24, the Lord Jesus Christ said that God is spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. And people have been kind of misinterpreting this to be just speaking in tongues, that when you speak in tongues, that's when you worship God in spirit and in truth. So what does it mean to worship God in spirit and in truth? Under normal circumstances, man on its own cannot even worship God by his own power. Because man is flesh. The flesh does not edify God. It takes the spirit to edify God. So how was the worship of God, or what is actually this worship that God was talking about? You notice that worship is just simply, one of the definition of worship is that it's a form of honor. You understand? So whenever we talked about worship in the days, as in the olden days before the coming of Christ, we are talking about honoring God, in a effusive way. And then most of those honor were done with substances like fruits, animals, gold, silver. They used it to worship God. You can check on Cain and Abel and see how they worship God. But most of these people worshiped God, but their heart was far from God. And because their heart was far from God, they just dump the substance, and then move on. But Jesus Christ was saying it at that point that, a time will come when people will no longer go to the mountain. So worship was restricted to a particular location. People will no longer go to the mountain, but people will have the liberty to worship God wherever they are. Because it's no longer going to be by substance, but it's going to be something that comes from the inner man, something that comes from the spirit. And what spirit is that? The spirit of God himself. In other words, man cannot worship God without his spirit. So the Lord Jesus Christ said that God is spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. Simply meaning that for you to worship God, you need his spirit. And how can you honor God? Because I said worship is a form of honor. How can you honor God without his spirit? Man cannot on his own. It takes the spirit of God to please God. It takes the spirit of God to reveal who God is that would even attract the worship.